What if humanity's greatest treasure was never meant to be found? What if some doors were sealed not to keep us out, but to keep something else in? Tonight's story takes us deep into the heart of India's most sacred temple, where ancient warnings echo through marble halls and gold-laden chambers hide secrets that predate recorded history. Before we begin, I want to give a thank you to Brassneck23 for suggesting this chilling tale of forbidden knowledge and cosmic horror. If you have ideas for future stories, please leave them in the comments below. And if you enjoy these late-night journeys into the unknown, don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that will keep you questioning what lurks in the shadows of our world. Now dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a story where curiosity becomes a curse and some mysteries are better left buried. The invitation arrived on cream-coloured paper, embossed with the seal of the Supreme Court of India. As a historian specialising in South Asian antiquities, I had expected many things in my career, but never a formal request to witness what the media was calling the greatest archaeological discovery of the modern era. The Sri Padmanabha temple in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, had stood for over 1,000 years as one of India's most sacred sites. Dedicated to Lord Vishnu, its towering gopurams scraped the tropical sky like a stone finger pointing toward the divine. What made it extraordinary wasn't just its spiritual significance, but what lay hidden beneath its ancient stones. In 2011, a legal petition had demanded an inventory of the temple's treasures. What they found in the first 5 vaults defied comprehension. Gold coins dating back centuries, precious stones the size of eggs, jewellery that belonged to forgotten dynasties. The estimated value exceeded $100 billion, making it potentially the richest religious site on Earth. But there was a 6th vault. Vault B. I arrived in Kerala on a sweltering morning in March, the humid air thick with the scent of jasmine and incense. The temple complex buzzed with activity as legal officials, archaeologists and security personnel prepared for what everyone hoped would be the crown jewel of the discovery. The head priest, an elderly man named Kandararu Mahesh, met our legal team at the temple's main entrance. His weathered face bore the weight of generations, and his eyes held something I couldn't immediately identify. Fear, perhaps, or resignation. "The courts have spoken," he said in heavily accented English, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I must tell you what my predecessors told me, as theirs told them for 8 centuries. He gestured toward the inner sanctum where Vault B lay sealed behind an ornate iron door. That chamber is not like the others. It was never meant to hold treasure for earthly eyes. The legal team exchanged glances. They had heard such protests before, religious authorities reluctant to surrender their hoarded wealth to public scrutiny. But something in the priest's tone gave me pause. "What do you mean?" I asked. Kandararu Mahesh's eyes fixed on mine. "In our most ancient texts, written on palm leaves that predate even the temple's construction, Vault B is not described as a treasury. It is called the chamber that must remain. The Sanskrit is very specific, yatna holitavyam, that which must not be opened." "Superstition," muttered the lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman from Delhi. "The Supreme Court's authority supersedes religious tradition." The priest continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The door has no key because it was never meant to have one. The locks were forged not to secure treasure, but to contain what lies beyond. Only those who know the sacred serpent mantras, knowledge lost for 3 centuries, can open it safely." A younger priest approached and whispered urgently in Malayalam. Kandararu Mahesh's face grew pale. "What is it?" I asked. "The workers in the bazaar," he said slowly. "They speak of dreams. All of them, the same dream for 3 nights now. They see a great wind rising from beneath the temple, carrying with it the breath of destruction." The attorney scoffed, but I noticed her hand trembling slightly as she made notes on her tablet. The other officials seemed less confident now, their earlier enthusiasm dimmed by the weight of the priest's words. As we walked toward the inner sanctum, I caught fragments of conversation among the temple workers. They spoke in hushed tones, casting nervous glances toward the sealed vault. An old woman selling flowers outside the temple grabbed my arm as I passed. "Sahib," she whispered urgently, "my grandmother told me stories." She said when the British came to survey the temple in 1931, they tried to open that door. 3 of them died within a week. 1 drowned in his own bathtub, 1 fell from his horse, 1 simply stopped breathing. I gently freed my arm, but her words followed me like shadows. As a rational man of science, I dismissed such tales as folklore born of ignorance and superstition. Yet something about the atmosphere around Vault B felt different. The air seemed thicker there, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. The vault's door stood before us now, a masterpiece of medieval craftsmanship. Unlike the other vaults, which had been sealed with relatively simple locks, Vault B presented a complex puzzle of interlocking mechanisms. 7 iron serpents wrapped around the door's frame, their mouths forming the keyholes. But there were no keys, hadn't been for centuries according to the temple records. The mantras were the keys, Kandurara Mahesh explained. Specific vibrations, spoken in precise sequence, would cause the mechanisms to release. But those who knew them took the knowledge to their graves in the 1750s, believing it safer that way. The legal team was growing impatient. They had come here to document treasure, not listen to religious lectures. But as I studied the door more closely, I began to understand the priest's reluctance. This wasn't just a vault. It was a seal, and seals by their very nature were meant to keep something in. As evening approached and we prepared to return to our hotel, I lingered in the temple courtyard. The setting sun painted the gopuram in shades of gold and crimson, and the evening prayers began their eternal rhythm. But beneath the familiar sounds of devotion, I could swear I heard something else. A low, almost inaudible humming that seemed to rise from the very stones beneath my feet. That night in my hotel room overlooking the temple, I made the first entry in what would become my final journal. There are doors in this world that remain closed not because we lack the key, but because we lack the wisdom to understand why they were locked in the first place. Tomorrow we attempt to open one such door. I pray we are prepared for whatever lies beyond. I had no way of knowing then how prescient those words would prove, or how dearly we would all pay for our curiosity. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day that makes the air shimmer like liquid glass. By 6 a.m. the temple complex was already bustling with activity. Security cordons kept the gathering crowd at bay while our team prepared for what the media had dubbed the greatest treasure hunt in modern history. The opening of vaults A, C, D, E and F had been methodical and spectacular. Each chamber revealed layer upon layer of unimaginable wealth. Golden idols studded with rubies and emeralds, ancient coins bearing the faces of forgotten kings, jewellery so intricate it seemed to have been crafted by divine hands rather than mortal ones. The inventory process had taken months, and still they were finding new treasures buried beneath the gold. But Vault B had remained sealed, waiting. The locksmith brought in for the task was Ravi Kumar, a slight man from Mumbai who specialised in historical mechanisms. He had successfully opened bank vaults from the British era, ancient strongboxes from Mughal times, even medieval treasure chests from Rajasthani forts. If anyone could breach the serpent locks of Vault B, it was him. The mechanism is unlike anything I have encountered, he admitted as he studied the door. These serpents are not merely decorative. Each one represents a different locking mechanism, and they appear to be interconnected. Opening one incorrectly might trigger a jamming system that would seal the vault permanently. The legal team was growing impatient. Photographers and videographers stood ready to document the moment. Government officials whispered among themselves about the economic implications of the discovery. The air thrummed with anticipation. Kandurara Mahesh stood apart from the group, his lips moving in what I assumed was silent prayer. When I approached him, he looked up with eyes that held the weight of centuries. "It is not too late," he said quietly. "The courts could be convinced to leave this one vault unopened. Sometimes the greatest treasure is wisdom, the wisdom to leave certain doors closed." "What exactly do you think is in there?" I asked. His answer chilled me to the bone. Something that was locked away for a reason our ancestors understood, even if we have forgotten. At precisely 10 a.m, Ravi Kumar began his work. He had decided to attempt the locks in sequence, starting with the serpent at the top and working clockwise. Each lock required different tools. Some responded to traditional picks. Others seemed to need specific pressure applied to hidden mechanisms. The first serpent yielded after an hour of careful manipulation. A soft click echoed through the chamber as its jaw opened, revealing the first keyhole. The crowd murmured with excitement. The second lock proved more challenging, requiring Ravi to simultaneously manipulate two different mechanisms while applying steady pressure to a third. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly. It was during his attempt on the third lock that the first sign appeared. A cool breeze began to blow through the temple, unusual for the stifling heat of the day. The flames on the oil lamps flickered, and several went out entirely. The temperature dropped noticeably, raising goosebumps on arms despite the tropical climate. "The wind has changed," one of the younger priests whispered, his voice tight with fear. By noon, dark clouds had begun gathering over Thiruvananthapuram, rolling in from the Arabian Sea with unnatural speed. The meteorological department later claimed it was an unexpected monsoon front, but those of us at the temple knew better. The storm was forming directly overhead, its centre position precisely above the temple complex. Ravi had successfully opened 4 of the 7 locks when the first lightning strike hit. The bolt crashed down into the temple courtyard, missing the main shrine by mere meters. The sound was deafening, and several people were knocked to their feet by the shockwave. "Perhaps we should postpone this," suggested the chief legal officer, eyeing the darkening sky nervously. But Ravi was committed now, his professional pride overriding his caution. "2 more locks," he muttered, wiping rain from his face as the first drops began to fall. "I can finish this." The 5th lock clicked open just as the second lightning bolt struck the temple's outer wall. Stone chips scattered across the courtyard, and one of the camera operators was struck by flying debris, opening a gash across his cheek. The 6th lock resisted all of Ravi's efforts. He tried for 2 hours, his tools slipping in hands made slick by rain and nervous sweat. The storm intensified with each passing minute, as if the very sky was protesting our actions. It was nearly 4 p.m. when disaster struck. Ravi had finally managed to manipulate the 6th mechanism when a bolt of lightning struck the temple's lightning rod. The electrical surge travelled through the building's metal framework and arced across the vault chamber. Ravi Kumar was thrown backward against the stone wall, his body convulsing as electricity coursed through him. The medical team rushed to his aid, but the damage was severe. Burns covered his arms and chest, and his heart had stopped briefly before the medics managed to revive him. As they carried him away on a stretcher, barely conscious and mumbling incoherently about voices in the metal, the storm reached its full fury. Rain lashed the temple complex with the force of a hurricane, and hail the size of golf balls battered the ancient stones. The Supreme Court officials huddled in the main shrine, their expensive suits soaked, and their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The lead attorney tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the fear in her eyes as she spoke into a satellite phone. "Yes, sir, I understand. Unusual circumstances. We'll suspend operations until—" "Yes, sir, immediately." When she ended the call, her hands were shaking. "The Supreme Court has ordered a temporary halt to all vault opening activities pending a full review of safety protocols." Kandararu Mahesh, who had watched the entire ordeal in stoic silence, finally spoke. "The door has 6 locks open and 1 remaining. This is the most dangerous state. It is neither sealed nor opened, but suspended between states." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," the old priest said, his voice barely audible over the thunder, "that whatever lies beyond can sense us now. It knows we are here." As if in response to his words, a sound emerged from behind the vault door, low, rhythmic, like the breathing of some vast creature. It was barely perceptible beneath the storm's fury, but those of us close to the vault heard it clearly. The breathing of something that had been waiting a very long time to be awakened. That evening, as the storm finally began to subside, I made my second journal entry. "We have accomplished something today, though I am no longer certain it was wise. The vault door stands partially open, like a mouth frozen mid-scream. 6 of 7 locks have yielded to our tools, but the 7th remains. Ravi Kumar lies in the hospital, his condition stable but his mind changed. He speaks of whispers in an ancient tongue, of promises made in the darkness before dawn. The priests were right about one thing. This is not merely a treasure vault, but what it truly contains remains to be seen. The breathing has stopped for now, but I find myself straining to hear it return. Part of me dreads what tomorrow will bring. Another part cannot wait to discover the truth. I fear both parts of me may soon regret their curiosity. Sleep eluded me that first night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that rhythmic breathing echoing from behind the vault door. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick with humidity and the scent of ozone, but an oppressive atmosphere lingered over the temple complex like a shroud. At 2 a.m, I gave up on rest and decided to return to the temple. The security guard, still shaken by the day's events, barely glanced at my credentials as I passed through the gates. Most of them huddled around a small fire in the courtyard, speaking in hushed Malayalam and casting nervous glances toward the inner sanctum. The temple at night was a different creature entirely. Shadows pooled in corners where daylight never quite reached, and the ancient stone seemed to absorb what little moonlight filtered through the monsoon clouds. My footsteps echoed eerily in the silence, each sound magnified by the vaulted ceilings. I made my way to the temple's archives, housed in a smaller building adjacent to the main shrine. Kandararu Mahesh had mentioned ancient manuscripts that detailed the history of Vault B, and my historian's instincts demanded I examine them myself. The archive keeper, an elderly man named Gopal, had given me permission earlier, though his eyes had held the same haunted look I was beginning to recognize in everyone connected to the temple. The archive was a treasure trove of knowledge, filled with palm leaf manuscripts, copper plates inscribed with ancient Tamil and Sanskrit, and bound volumes of temple records dating back centuries. Many were written in scripts I couldn't read, but I found several texts in Sanskrit that seemed relevant to my investigation. It was in a manuscript dated to the 14th century that I found the first clear reference to Vault B's true nature. The writing was cramped and difficult to decipher, but what I read made my blood run cold. In the year of the Great Plague, when death walked among the people like a familiar friend, the priests of the southern temple completed their terrible task. The devouring wind, which had consumed 3 kingdoms and turned fertile lands to dust, was bound within the chamber that must remain. 7 locks were forged, each one requiring the breath of sacred words to open. But the knowledge of these words was deemed too dangerous for any mortal to possess, and so the key speakers took poison rather than risk the wind's return. The devouring wind, not treasure, not gold, not jewels, but something the medieval priests considered so dangerous that they willingly died to keep it contained. I continued reading, my hands trembling slightly as I turned the fragile pages. The binding required the sacrifice of 49 Brahmin priests, their life breath woven into the mantras that hold the wind in check. Should the seals ever be broken without the proper words, the wind will taste freedom again and hunger for the breath of all living things. It will seek first those who disturbed its slumber, then spread outward like ripples on a pond, until all the world gasps for air that will not come. The sound from the main temple made me look up. It was faint, almost inaudible but distinctly rhythmic. The breathing had resumed. I closed the manuscript carefully and made my way back toward the inner sanctum, my heart hammering against my ribs. The temple seemed different now, as if the very architecture was aware of my presence. Shadows moved where no shadows should be, and the air felt thick, almost viscous. The vault chamber was empty of people, but not of presence. The partially open door seemed to pulse with malevolent life, and the breathing was definitely stronger now. It wasn't coming from behind the door, I realized with growing terror. It was coming from beneath it. As I stepped closer, I noticed something else. The temperature around the vault had dropped significantly. My breath came out in small puffs of vapour, and frost was forming on the metal serpents despite the tropical climate outside. Then I heard the voices. They were whispers at first, so faint I thought they might be the wind through stone corridors. But as I strained to listen, they became clearer. Multiple voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognise but which seemed hauntingly familiar. as if heard in half-remembered dreams. The whispers seemed to be coming from the gaps around the vault door, rising up from some vast space below. They spoke in rhythmic cadences that matched the breathing, and though I couldn't understand the words, their meaning was clear. Hunger, ancient and patient, promises of release, threats of what would come if the final lock was opened. I fumbled for my phone to record the phenomenon, but the device was completely dead despite having a full charge when I had entered the temple. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I realised they were becoming comprehensible. The seeker comes in the dark. The seeker who reads the old words. Closer. Seeker. Closer to the threshold. So long since warm breath filled these chambers. Terror flooded my system and I stumbled backward, knocking over a brass lamp that clattered against the stone floor. The sound echoed like gunshots through the temple, and suddenly the whispers stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the voices had been. I fled the temple, my academic composure completely shattered. Behind me I could swear I heard something like laughter. Dry, rustling laughter that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Back in my hotel room, I sat awake until dawn, staring out at the temple silhouette against the lightning sky. My hands shook as I wrote in my journal. I understand now why the priest tried to stop us. Vault B contains no earthly treasure, but something far older and more terrible. The manuscripts speak of the devouring wind, an entity or force bound within the chamber by sacrifices and mantras. We have partially broken the binding and it is beginning to wake. The voices called me Seeker and spoke of warm breath. I believe it feeds on life itself, not just death, but the very act of breathing, the essence of living things. The medieval priests who bound it understood this and chose death rather than risk its escape. 6 locks are open, 1 remains, but I fear that even with the 7th lock intact we may have already gone too far. The boundary between the chamber and our world is weakening. The devouring wind is testing its prison, looking for cracks in the ancient seals. God help us all if it finds one. The call came at 6 a.m, jolting me from the first real sleep I'd managed in 2 days. The voice on the other end was crisp, confident, with a slight accent that marked international education and global business dealings. Professor Malhotra, my name is Victor Ashworth. I represent certain interested parties regarding your work at the Padmanabha Swami Temple. I believe we need to talk. I had heard of Ashworth, of course. Everyone in academic circles had. British-born but internationally based, he had made his fortune in tech startups before transitioning into what he euphemistically called cultural preservation. In reality, he was one of the world's most sophisticated antiquities collectors. Legal when possible, questionably legal when necessary. I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to discuss the temple project, I began, but he cut me off smoothly. Professor, I'm sitting in the lobby of your hotel. The conversation is going to happen whether you come down willingly or I come up. Your choice, but I think you'll find what I have to say quite illuminating. 20 minutes later I sat across from Victor Ashworth in the hotel's restaurant. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40, with prematurely silver hair and eyes the colour of a winter sky. His suit was perfectly tailored, and his manner suggested someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. You look tired, Professor, he observed, signalling the waiter for coffee. Difficult night at the temple, I imagine. How do you... I started, then stopped. Of course he knew. Men like Ashworth had sources everywhere. I know about the breathing, he said quietly, his voice just loud enough for me to hear. I know about the whispers, and I know you've discovered what Vault B really contains. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. The question is, do you understand the implications? I understand that some things should remain buried, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Ashworth laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Professor, you disappoint me. Here we have possibly the greatest discovery in human history, and you want to bury it again? Do you have any idea what the economic implications alone would be? This isn't about economics. Everything is about economics, he interrupted. Do you know what's happening in the financial capitals right now? Word has leaked about the temple treasures. Not the specifics, but enough. Gold prices are fluctuating wildly. Currency markets are in chaos. The mere possibility that India might dump $100 billion worth of precious metals and gems onto the world market has central bankers calling emergency meetings. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of graphs and charts. Now imagine what would happen if the true contents of Vault B were revealed. Not just gold, Professor, but something far more valuable. Proof that our understanding of human history is fundamentally flawed. What are you talking about? Ashworth's smile was predatory. You've read the manuscripts. The devouring wind, the binding rituals, the sacrifice of 49 priests. These aren't fairy tales, Professor. They're historical records of humanity's first encounter with something beyond our current understanding of reality. He leaned back, studying my reaction. Governments around the world are watching this situation very carefully. The Americans have a cultural attaché in Mumbai who's actually CIA. The Chinese have tripled their diplomatic presence in Kerala. The Russians have been making very generous offers to fund archaeological research in the region. Why? Because everyone understands what you're only beginning to grasp. Vault B doesn't just contain an entity or force, it contains knowledge. The medieval priests who bound it had to understand what they were dealing with. They developed technologies, techniques, methods of manipulating reality itself that we've lost. Ashworth gestured toward the temple, visible through the restaurant's windows. Think about it. They created a prison that has held for 8 centuries. No modern government has containment systems that sophisticated. What if we could reverse engineer their methods? What if we could learn to harness whatever they bound? You're talking about releasing it. I'm talking about studying it, controlling it. Imagine the applications: unlimited energy, matter manipulation, perhaps even the ability to influence consciousness itself. We could reset not just the global economy, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. I felt sick. The manuscripts are clear. The thing in that vault feeds on life itself, the moment you open it. The moment we open it properly, Ashworth corrected, with the right precautions and containment systems. Professor, I've spent the last decade acquiring artifacts and texts from private collections around the world. I have fragments of the binding mantras, not complete, but enough to begin understanding the mechanisms involved. He slid a leather portfolio across the table. Photographs of Sanskrit inscriptions from a Tibetan monastery, cuneiform tablets from a collector in Dubai, ancient Greek texts from a private library in Switzerland. All describing similar entities, Professor, similar binding rituals. This isn't an isolated phenomenon, it's part of a pattern that spans continents and millennia. Despite my revulsion, I found myself opening the portfolio. The documents inside were extraordinary. Clear evidence of other devouring winds, bound in locations across the ancient world. Tibet, Mesopotamia, the Greek islands, even references in Mayan codices from Central America. How many? I whispered. We've identified 17 probable sites, Ashworth said. Most have been lost to time, their bindings failed or their locations forgotten, but a few remain active. The temple in Kerala is just the most accessible. Most accessible for what? His smile returned, colder than before. For opening, Professor. The Supreme Court's investigation provides perfect cover. Legal authority, scientific oversight, global media attention. When we breach that final lock, the whole world will be watching, and recording, and learning. The government will stop you. Which government? The Indian authorities who authorised the investigation in the first place. The international observers who want their slice of the discovery. Professor, you're being naive. Everyone wants this opened. The only question is who controls what comes next. Ashworth stood, straightening his jacket. I'm offering you a position on my team. Full funding for your research, access to resources you've only dreamed of, and a chance to be part of the most significant discovery in human history. The alternative... He let the sentence hang. What alternative? The alternative is that this happens without you, and when it does, when the truth comes out, history will remember you as the man who had access to the greatest secret on earth and chose to hide in his hotel room instead. After he left, I sat alone in the restaurant for hours, staring at the portfolio he'd left behind. The evidence was undeniable. Whatever was bound in Vault B was part of something much larger, much older than I'd imagined. But I also remembered the voices in the dark, the hunger in their whispered words, the way the temperature dropped and shadows moved without reason. Some doors, I realised, were locked from the inside. That evening I made what would prove to be my most fateful journal entry. Ashworth's offer is tempting, I must admit. The chance to study something truly unprecedented, to be part of rewriting human history. But I cannot shake the feeling that we are children playing with weapons we do not understand. The manuscripts speak of the devouring wind's hunger, its patient malevolence. This is not some abstract force to be studied and harnessed. This is something that waits and watches and learns about those who would disturb its slumber. I have decided to decline Ashworth's offer, but I fear the decision has been made for all of us. One way or another, Vault B will be opened. The only question now is whether any of us will survive what comes next. The breathing grows stronger each night. Soon, I think, it will not matter what we choose. The choice will be made for us. 3 days passed in tense anticipation. The Supreme Court maintained its suspension of official vault opening operations, while Ravi Kumar recovered in the hospital, but the media attention only intensified. International news crews camped outside the temple, and the Indian government found itself under increasing pressure from various quarters to resume the investigation. I spent those days translating more of the ancient manuscripts, piecing together a clearer picture of what the medieval priests had done. The binding ritual had been extraordinarily complex, requiring not just the sacrifice of the 49 Brahmins, but the coordinated efforts of thousands of devotees across multiple temple sites. The devouring wind hadn't simply been locked away, it had been woven into a spiritual prison that drew its strength from collective faith and continuous prayer. But faith was a finite resource, and prayers could be interrupted. On the 4th night I was awakened by my phone buzzing with an urgent text message. "It is done. Come quickly if you want to witness history. V.A. Ashworth." I dressed quickly and made my way through the pre-dawn streets toward the temple. The security cordon was still in place, but I noticed immediately that something was wrong. Too many of the guards were looking up at the sky instead of watching the perimeter, and several were making rapid phone calls. The first thing I noticed when I reached the inner sanctum was the silence. No breathing, no whispers, just an oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Ozone and heated metal, as if lightning had recently struck inside the temple itself. The vault door stood completely open. Ashworth waited in the chamber, along with 2 technicians I didn't recognise and a security team that looked more military than civilian. He wore a satisfied smile, and what appeared to be some kind of specialised breathing apparatus round his neck. "Professor," he greeted me warmly. "Perfect timing. We completed the breach about an hour ago." "How?" I managed to ask, staring at the open serpent locks. "Plasma cutting equipment," one of the technicians explained. "Industrial grade used for offshore oil rig construction. We simply severed the final lock mechanism rather than trying to manipulate it." "But the mantras," I protested. "The manuscript said—" "The manuscripts were written by medieval priests," Ashworth interrupted. "Brilliant for their time, but ultimately limited by the technology available to them. Sometimes, Professor, brute force is more effective than ancient wisdom." He gestured toward the open vault. "Would you like to see what 8 centuries of mystery looks like?" Against every instinct screaming in my head, I approached the doorway. What I saw beyond defied everything I had expected. The vault wasn't a chamber at all, or it was the entrance to a shaft that descended deep into the earth. Stone steps, worn smooth by age, spiraled downward into darkness so complete that our powerful flashlights couldn't penetrate more than a few dozen feet. The walls were carved with intricate reliefs depicting what appeared to be apocalyptic scenes. Cities consumed by winds that moved like living things, skies raining fire, figures in priestly robes performing desperate rituals as the world ended around them. But it was the air currents that truly frightened me. Wind rose continuously from the depths, carrying with it a scent like heated metal and ozone. The breeze was warm, almost body temperature, and it moved with an odd rhythm, in and out, in and out. like the breathing of some vast creature. "How deep does it go?" I whispered. "We've dropped weighted lines to over 300 feet, Ashworth replied. "No bottom yet. The shaft appears to be natural, but the stairs are definitely human-made, or at least made by something with human-level intelligence." One of the technicians, a young woman with short dark hair, looked up from her instruments. "Sir, the atmospheric readings are getting more unusual. Oxygen content is actually higher than normal, but there's something else in the air. Some kind of complex hydrocarbon chain we can't identify." "Breathable?" Ashworth asked. "Technically, yes, but I wouldn't recommend it without filtration." As if summoned by her words, a sound echoed up from the depths. It wasn't quite a voice, but it wasn't quite wind either. Something between the two, like words spoken by air itself. The temperature in the chamber began to drop rapidly. Frost formed on the metal equipment, and our breath came out in visible puffs despite the tropical climate outside. "Sir," the male technician called urgently, "the seismic monitors are picking up vibrations." "Something's moving down there." Ashworth's expression grew excited rather than concerned. "Moving how? Geological activity?" "No, sir. The pattern is too regular, too rhythmic. It's almost like breathing," I finished for him. A new sound emerged from the shaft. A low, inhuman moan that seemed to rise from the impossible depths. The wind currents intensified, and suddenly papers throughout the chamber began whipping around as if caught in a hurricane. "Power's fluctuating," one of the technicians reported. "All our equipment is showing interference." The lights went out. In the darkness, lit only by emergency battery-powered lamps, the moaning from the shaft grew louder and more complex. It was definitely voices now. Multiple voices speaking in harmony, but no language any human throat could produce. The words seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate directly in our bones. "Free, so long bound, taste the warm breath, feel the life, hungry, so very hungry." The emergency lighting flickered and failed, plunging us into absolute darkness. In that darkness, something touched my face. Not a hand, not a wind, but something that felt like moving air with purpose and intelligence. "Everyone out!" Ashworth shouted, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Full evacuation now!" We stumbled toward the chamber entrance, guided only by the dim glow of our flashlights. Behind us, the voices from the shaft grew louder and more insistent, and the wind carried with it something that felt distinctly aware. As we burst out of the inner sanctum into the temple courtyard, the full magnitude of what we had done became horrifyingly clear. The power grid for the entire city had failed. Thiruvananthapuram stretched out below us in complete darkness, not a single light visible from the temple's elevated position. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, and the night sky flickered with what looked like aurora borealis. Impossible at this latitude. "My God," whispered one of the technicians, staring up at the unnatural light show. "What have we done?" The answer came not from any of us, but from the temple itself. The ancient stones began to vibrate with a low subsonic hum that we felt more than heard. Cracks appeared in the walls of the inner sanctum, spreading outward like spider webs. And from every crack, every crevice, every gap in the stonework came that warm, metallic-smelling wind. Ashworth was frantically making phone calls on what appeared to be a satellite phone, but the device kept cutting out. "Damn it," he muttered. "Something's interfering with all electronic communications." "It's not interference," I said, a terrible certainty filling me. "It's intention. The thing down there, it doesn't want us calling for help." As if to confirm my words, a new sound emerged from the temple. Laughter. Not human laughter, but the sound the wind might make if it found something amusing. It echoed from the stones themselves, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The first casualty came without warning. One of Ashworth's security team, a large man who had been standing near the vault entrance, suddenly collapsed. He wasn't unconscious. He was awake, aware, but unable to breathe. His chest rose and fell frantically, but no air seemed to enter his lungs. His face turned blue, then purple, and within minutes he was dead. "Heart attack," Ashworth said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," I replied, kneeling beside the body. The man's expression was one of pure terror. his eyes wide and staring at something only he could see. Look at his face. This wasn't cardiac arrest. Something took his breath. Even as I spoke, I could feel it myself. A subtle resistance when I tried to inhale, as if the air around us was becoming thicker, more reluctant to enter our lungs. The warm wind from the temple was spreading outward, and wherever it touched, the very atmosphere seemed to change. "We need to get away from here," I said, standing up. "Far away, right now." But Ashworth was staring back at the temple with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. "We've actually done it. We've released something that can manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself." "It's going to kill us all," I replied. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but think of what we could learn in the process." That was when I realised Victor Ashworth was completely insane. Dawn brought no relief. If anything, the daylight made the horror more visible and therefore more real. The city of Thiruvananthapuram lay under a pall of unnatural fog that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, and emergency services were reporting casualties across the metropolitan area. I had retreated to my hotel room, but even there I could feel the presence spreading outward from the temple like ripples on a pond. The air itself felt different. Thicker, more conscious, as if it was watching and evaluating everything it touched. The local news, what little could be broadcast given the power disruptions, reported the official story. A massive electrical storm had caused citywide blackouts and infrastructure damage. Authorities urged people to remain indoors until power could be restored. Nothing about ancient vaults or bound entities or the breathing darkness that now crept through the streets. But the deaths were harder to explain away. They had started during the night and accelerated with the dawn. People found dead in their homes, their beds, their cars, all with the same expression of terror, all apparently suffocated despite being in open air. The hospitals were overwhelmed, and the medical professionals had no explanation for what they were seeing. I knew, though, the devouring wind was free and it was feeding. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Roof of the Mascot Hotel. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers. KM. Kandararu Mahesh. The Mascot Hotel was one of the tallest buildings in the city, and its roof provided a panoramic view of Thiruvananthapuram. When I arrived, I found the old priest standing at the edge, looking out over his wounded city with eyes full of ancient sadness. "You came," he said without turning around. "I thought you might." "You are perhaps the only one among the outsiders who truly understands what has been done." "Can it be stopped?" I asked directly. He was quiet for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. The binding took 49 lives and 8 centuries of continuous prayer to maintain. We have neither the knowledge nor the time to recreate such measures. Then everyone in the city is going to die. "Everyone in the city is already dead," he corrected sadly. "They simply haven't stopped breathing yet." The devouring wind is patient. It prefers to savour its meals rather than consume them quickly. Below us, the unnatural fog continued to spread outward in slow, deliberate spirals. I could see people moving through it, apparently unaware that they were walking through their own doom. "Tell me about it," I said. "The real story, not the sanitized version from the manuscripts." Kandararu Mahesh sighed deeply. In the year 1264, according to our most secret records, a merchant ship arrived in Kochi carrying treasures from the court of Kublai Khan. Among the cargo was a sealed urn bearing warnings in 7 languages, all saying the same thing: "Do not open. Contains the breath of the ending world." He turned to face me and I saw that his eyes were filled with tears. The merchant who brought it had watched it consume 3 cities on his journey from China. He begged our ancestors to find a way to bind it permanently. The task fell to our temple, because we possessed the knowledge of certain older practices. What kind of practices? The kind that modern men would dismiss as superstition. But you have seen the results of those practices, Professor. They worked for 8 centuries. A new sound reached us from the city below, screaming. Not the screams of injury or fear, but the screams of people discovering that the air they breathed was becoming their enemy. The binding ritual, I pressed. Can any part of it be recreated? The ritual required 49 volunteers to surrender their life breath to strengthen the prison. Each one had to die while speaking specific mantras, their last words becoming part of the seal itself. Even if we could find such volunteers, the knowledge of the mantras died with the last key speaker in 1751. There must be something. There is one possibility, he interrupted. The devouring wind is not truly alive in the way we understand life. It is hunger given form, appetite made manifest. But even hunger can be satisfied, at least temporarily. What do you mean? It feeds on the breath of living things. Not just the act of breathing, but the life force that breath represents. If it could be given a sufficiently large offering, it might return to dormancy long enough for new bindings to be crafted. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You're talking about feeding it an entire city. I am talking about the choice that will soon face the world. Feed it one city, or watch it spread across continents. The devouring wind grows stronger with each life it consumes. Soon, it will be powerful enough to cross oceans. Below us, the fog had thickened to the point where entire city blocks were invisible. Emergency sirens had fallen silent, either because the vehicles had stopped working, or because there was no one left to operate them. Ashworth, I said suddenly. Where is he now? Kandararu Mahesh's expression darkened. The fool who opened the vault? He has retreated to a compound outside the city. He believes he can study the entity, learn to control it. He does not understand that it is studying him in return. We have to stop him. We have to survive him, the priest corrected. The devouring wind can sense those who disturbed its prison. It will hunt each of us individually before turning its attention to the general population. You, Professor, are already marked. As if summoned by his words, I felt that familiar touch on my face, the sensation of intelligent air, evaluating and tasting. The temperature around us dropped by 20 degrees in seconds, and frost began forming on the rooftop despite the tropical heat. It has found us, Kandararu Mahesh said calmly. Now we run. But even as we headed for the stairwell, I wondered, in a city being consumed by living wind, where exactly could we run to? The fog was rising now, climbing the sides of buildings like a slow-motion tsunami, and within its grey depths, I could swear I saw shapes moving. Shapes that looked almost human, but moved with the fluid grace of air currents. The dead, I realised. The devouring wind wasn't just killing people, it was incorporating them, making them part of itself. We weren't just facing an ancient entity, we were facing an entity that was learning, growing, and building an army from its victims. The temple compound had become a fortress of desperate faith. When Kandararu Mahesh and I arrived, we found thousands of devotees gathered in the outer courtyards, their voices raised in continuous prayer, and their oil lamps creating islands of light in the encroaching grey fog. The sound of their chanting seemed to push back the unnatural mist, creating a bubble of clear air around the sacred grounds. The collective prayers, the old priest explained as we hurried toward the main shrine. They remember the old bindings even if they don't understand them. Faith has power here. It always has. But even as he spoke, I could see the strain on the faces around us. Many of the devotees were elderly, and hours of continuous chanting were taking their toll. Several had already collapsed from exhaustion, and those who remained looked hollow-eyed with effort. How long can they maintain this? I asked. Until they can't, he replied grimly. Inside the main shrine, a council of the temple's senior priests had gathered around ancient texts and ritual implements. They spoke in rapid Malayalam, their voices tight with urgency. When they saw Kandararu Mahesh, they fell silent and looked to him with the respect due to their senior member. He spoke to them in their native language for several minutes, and I watched their faces grow increasingly grave. Finally, one of them, a middle-aged man with intricate ritual scars on his arms, approached me. "You are the historian who witnessed the opening," he said in accented English. "You have seen the true nature of what we face." I nodded. "I've read the manuscripts. I understand what your ancestors did to bind it. Then you understand why we must attempt the same ritual even without the proper knowledge?" "The 49 volunteers," I said, suddenly understanding. "You're going to try to recreate the original binding." "We are going to try," he confirmed, "but we lack the key speakers. the ones who knew the proper mantras. The binding will be improvised. What does that mean? Kandararu Mahesh answered for him. It means we will probably fail, but perhaps we can weaken it enough that future generations will find a way to complete what we start. Outside, the chanting faltered for a moment, and immediately the temperature in the shrine dropped. Through the open doorways, I could see the grey fog pressing closer to the temple walls, like a living thing testing the boundaries of a cage. The faithful are weakening, one of the younger priests observed. Soon the prayers will not be enough. Then we begin now, Kandararu Mahesh decided. Gather the volunteers. I watched in horrified fascination as 49 temple priests and devoted lay people stepped forward to offer their lives. They ranged in age from teenagers to elderly men and women, but all shared the same expression of serene determination. They understood exactly what was being asked of them, and they accepted it willingly. The ritual began at sunset, timed to coincide with the traditional evening prayers. The volunteers arranged themselves in a complex pattern around the temple's central shrine, each one positioned according to ancient diagrams that the priest had reconstructed from fragments of surviving texts. What should I do? I asked Kandararu Mahesh. You should witness, he replied. Someone must survive to tell what happened here. Someone must remember the sacrifice. The chanting began slowly, a low harmonic drone that seemed to resonate through the temple stones themselves. The volunteers spoke in Sanskrit, reciting mantras that had been preserved in the temple's oral tradition even though their specific purpose had been forgotten. As the ritual progressed, I began to understand the mechanism of the original binding. The volunteers weren't simply dying. They were transforming their life force into something else, weaving their essential being into a spiritual barrier that could contain entities like the devouring wind. The first volunteer, an elderly woman who had served the temple for 60 years, began to glow with a faint golden light. The light grew brighter as she continued chanting, and I realized that I could see through her, as if she was becoming translucent. One by one, the others began to show the same phenomenon. Their bodies became vehicles for something greater than individual consciousness, their voices harmonizing in ways that transcended normal human vocal cords. And the devouring wind noticed. The fog around the temple suddenly contracted, pulling back like a predator preparing to strike. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on every surface within seconds. The oil lamps flickered but held their flames, kept burning by the collective will of the faithful. Then the attack began. The fog didn't simply advance. It exploded inward, moving with the speed and force of a hurricane. The devotees in the outer courtyard screamed as the grey mist enveloped them, but their screams were cut short as their breath was literally pulled from their lungs. Inside the shrine, the 49 volunteers continued their chanting, even as the devouring wind pressed against the walls like a living siege engine. Cracks appeared in the ancient stonework, and through each crack came tendrils of that intelligent fog. "Hold fast," Kandararu Mahesh called out in English, then repeated the words in Malayalam. "The binding is almost complete." But I could see that several of the volunteers were beginning to fail. The transformation process was accelerating beyond their ability to control it, and instead of becoming part of a spiritual barrier, they were simply burning out like overloaded circuits. The devouring wind sensed the weakness and pressed its advantage. The main door of the shrine burst open, and the grey fog poured in like a living tide. I felt that familiar resistance when I tried to breathe, as if the air itself was turning hostile. 3 more volunteers collapsed, their light extinguished, then 5 more. The binding pattern was falling apart, and with it, our last hope of containing the entity. That was when the impossible happened. The elderly woman, who had been the first to begin glowing, suddenly blazed with brilliant light. Not golden now, but white hot and painful to look at directly. Her voice rose above the others, and the words she spoke were not in any human language, but somehow I understood them. By breath given freely, by life offered willingly, by faith made manifest, be bound. The light spread from her to the remaining volunteers, linking them in a web of pure energy that filled the entire shrine. The devouring wind recoiled as if struck, and for a moment the grey fog retreated. But the effort was too much. One by one, the volunteers collapsed. their life force completely spent. Within minutes, only Kandararu, Mahesh and I remained conscious in the shrine, surrounded by the still forms of those who had given everything to buy us a temporary reprieve. Outside, the fog began to advance again, slower now but with renewed malevolent purpose. The binding had wounded it, but not destroyed it, and now it was angry. Did it work? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Kandararu Mahesh looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. We have given the world perhaps a day, maybe 2. The devouring wind will need time to heal from what was done to it here. But then it continues feeding. Then it continues feeding, he confirmed, and it will remember those who hurt it. It will come for us first, Professor. You and I, and the man who opened its prison. The hunt has already begun. As if to emphasize his words, that familiar touch caressed my face. Cold now instead of warm, and infinitely patient. The devouring wind had learned to hate. The official response came with military precision. By dawn, the temple complex had been cordoned off by units of the Indian Army, and the media was reporting a catastrophic gas leak that had necessitated the evacuation of central Thiruvananthapuram. Satellite phones and internet connections throughout the city remained mysteriously disrupted, preventing any unauthorized communication about the true nature of events. I watched from a secure location as black helicopters circled the temple, and men in hazmat suits entered the shrine where 49 people had sacrificed their lives to buy humanity a few precious hours. Their bodies were removed in sealed containers, their sacrifice reduced to casualties of industrial accident in the preliminary reports. Victor Ashworth's compound had become a fortress of its own, ringed with military vehicles and buzzing with activity. From intelligence sources that Kandararu Mahesh somehow possessed, the temple's network of information was far more sophisticated than I had realised. We learned that Ashworth was in constant communication with officials from multiple governments. They're not trying to stop him, the old priest said as we reviewed the intercepted communications. They're trying to make a deal with him. The Supreme Court of India issued a terse statement that afternoon. Following a comprehensive geological survey, Vault B of the Sri Padmanabha Swami temple has been found to be structurally compromised and empty of significant archaeological content. The chamber will be permanently sealed as a safety precaution. Empty, they were calling it empty, but I knew better. The thing that had been bound for 8 centuries was very much present. It had simply learned to hide itself while it recovered from the partial rebinding our desperate ritual had achieved. The grey fog had dissipated, but only because the devouring wind no longer needed such obvious manifestations. It was growing more sophisticated, more subtle in its approach. The death toll in the city had been substantial but explainable. Heart attacks, strokes, respiratory failures, all within the normal range of statistical variation for a population of 750,000. The medical examiners found nothing unusual because they weren't looking for the right signs. How do you autopsy someone whose life force has been gradually drained away? My official debriefing took place in a nondescript government building, conducted by officials who spoke in bureaucratic euphemisms and asked questions designed to establish a narrative rather than uncover truth. I was required to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement backed by the Official Secrets Act, surrendering all notes, photographs and recordings related to my work at the temple. Professor Malhotra, said the lead investigator, a thin woman with steel grey hair and eyes like winter, I trust you understand the sensitivity of this matter. National security, international relations, economic stability, all of these factors require that certain interpretations of events be maintained. You're asking me to lie about what I witnessed, I said. I'm asking you to consider the greater good, she replied. What purpose would be served by creating public panic over what are ultimately unexplained phenomena? The temple's treasures have been catalogued and will benefit the people of India. The archaeological investigation has been completed successfully. End of story. And the people who died? Tragic casualties of an industrial accident that has now been resolved. Their families will be compensated appropriately. She slid a leather portfolio across the table, similar to the one Ashworth had shown me, but thicker. Your compensation, Professor. Consultation fees, research stipends, and a substantial grant for your university department, enough to fund a decade of legitimate archaeological work. The money was substantial, more than I could earn in 5 years of normal academic work. But it came with invisible chains, bank accounts that could be frozen, research permits that could be revoked, academic positions that could be eliminated with a phone call. "What about Ashworth?" I asked. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Mr. Ashworth is under protective custody while we assess the full implications of the situation. His cooperation with ongoing investigations has been valuable. Protective custody or house arrest? The distinction is irrelevant, Professor. What matters is that all parties involved understand their responsibilities moving forward." As I left the briefing, I noticed something that chilled me more than any supernatural encounter. The woman conducting the interview had a small serpent-shaped mark on her forehead, barely visible, like a birthmark or old scar. But I had seen that same mark beginning to form on my own face in the hotel mirror that morning. The devouring wind was marking its targets. That evening, in what I thought would be my final journal entry, I wrote, "The official version of events is now established. Vault B contained nothing but empty stone chambers and geological instability. The deaths in the city were caused by industrial accidents and natural causes. The strange phenomena witnessed by multiple people were hallucinations caused by stress and suggestion. Everyone who matters has been paid, threatened, or discredited into silence. The story that will appear in history books will be sanitized, rational, completely divorced from the terrifying reality of what we unleashed. But the thing in the vault is not bound by official narratives or government cover-ups. It is patient, intelligent, and now it has had time to study us, to learn about our world, our weaknesses, our technologies. Ashworth was wrong about one thing. We can't control what we don't understand. But he was right about another. This is just the beginning. What happened in Kerala will happen again, somewhere else, when the devouring wind is strong enough to manifest directly. I am marked now. We all are. Everyone who participated in opening the vault, everyone who witnessed its contents. It will come for us first, one by one, taking our breath and our lives as payment for the disturbance we caused. But perhaps that is justice. Perhaps those who break ancient seals deserve to pay the price for their curiosity. The wind has been very patient. Soon, I think, its patience will end. I closed the journal and locked it in my hotel safe, though I suspected such precautions were meaningless. In the morning, I would fly back to Delhi, resume my teaching position, and attempt to pretend that nothing had changed. But in the distance, barely audible over the city's night sounds, I could hear something like breathing, slow, steady, and getting closer. The deaths began exactly 1 week after the vault was sealed. I was back in Delhi, attempting to resume my normal life, when the first news reached me. Victor Ashworth's private jet had disappeared somewhere over the Indian Ocean during what should have been a routine flight to Singapore. Search and rescue teams found no wreckage, no emergency signals, no trace of the aircraft or its 7 passengers. But that wasn't the strangest part. According to radar records and satellite tracking, the jet had been flying normally at 35,000 feet when it simply stopped. Not crashed, not descended, stopped. The radar signature had remained stationary in midair for 17 minutes before vanishing entirely from all tracking systems. Mechanical failure doesn't explain that pattern, I told myself, though I knew the real explanation was far worse. The devouring wind had claimed its first victim from among those who had directly participated in the vault's opening. 2 days later, I received a call from the hospital in Tiruvananthapuram. Ravi Kumar, the locksmith who had opened 6 of the 7 serpent locks, was dead. The official cause was listed as sudden cardiac arrest, but the nurse who spoke to me mentioned details that didn't make it into the medical report. "It was very strange, sir," she said in accented English. "He had been recovering well from his electrical injuries, but last night he began speaking in Sanskrit, complex verses that none of our translators could understand. He claimed that voices were calling to him from the chamber beneath the chamber. Then he tried to leave the hospital, saying he had to complete the work and open the final lock. How did he die? He was found in the hospital's basement, sir, in a storage room that had been flooded with water, though there were no broken pipes or leaks. He had drowned, sir. Drowned while standing upright, with his lungs full of brackish water that tasted of the sea. Drowned in a locked room, hundreds of miles from any ocean. The parallels to the ancient texts were unmistakable. The devouring wind could manipulate more than just air. It could call forth the elements themselves to claim its victims. The pattern accelerated over the following weeks. Dr. Anita Sharma, the Supreme Court-appointed archaeological observer, died in her New Delhi apartment. Her neighbours reported hearing her screaming about voices in the ventilation system before she was found suffocated in a room with all windows open and perfect air circulation. Professor James Mitchell, the British geological expert who had consulted on the vault's structural integrity, was discovered dead in his London office. The cause of death was listed as aneurysm, but security footage showed him speaking to empty air for hours before his collapse, as if carrying on a conversation with invisible entities. Each death followed the same pattern. The victims would begin hearing voices, become obsessed with returning to complete some unfinished task, and then die by some form of suffocation or drowning. The authorities investigating each case found no connections, no patterns, nothing to suggest anything other than unfortunate coincidences. But I knew better. We were being hunted. The serpent mark on my forehead had grown more pronounced, visible now even in normal lighting. It appeared to be a brand of some kind, burned into the skin from within. When I researched similar marks in historical texts, I found references to the seal of the breathless, a sign that marked those claimed by entities that fed on life force. I wasn't the only one who had noticed. Other survivors of the vault opening had been reaching out through secure channels, comparing notes and sharing their growing terror. The government officials who had participated were using their resources to hide in secure locations. The journalists who had covered the story were fleeing to foreign countries. Everyone who had been touched by the devouring wind understood that running was pointless, but the human instinct for survival demanded the attempt. It was during this period of mounting dread that I received an unexpected visitor. Kandararu Mahesh appeared at my university office on a Tuesday morning, looking haggard and aged far beyond his years. "Professor," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with obvious fatigue, "I bring grave news from Kerala. More deaths. Worse. The binding we attempted, it is failing more rapidly than we anticipated. The entity has learned to corrupt the spiritual barriers we erected. It no longer needs to wait for them to weaken naturally." He produced a tablet computer and showed me satellite imagery of the temple complex. What I saw made my blood freeze. The buildings were still there, but they appeared to be breathing. The stone walls expanded and contracted in a slow, rhythmic pattern that was clearly visible from space. "It has claimed the temple as its new body," Kandararu Mahesh explained. "The entire complex has become an extension of its consciousness. Soon, it will be strong enough to manifest directly anywhere in the world. How long do we have? Days, perhaps. But that is not why I came to see you." His expression grew even more grave. "I have discovered why you and I have survived when so many others have died." "What do you mean?" "The devouring wind does not simply kill its marked victims. It studies them first. It learns from each death, gaining knowledge about our world, our methods, our weaknesses. You and I represent the two sources of information it values most: academic knowledge and spiritual tradition." The implication hit me like a physical blow. We're not survivors. We're specimens. We're being preserved until the entity has learned everything it can from us. When that process is complete, we will die as the others have died, but our knowledge will live on as part of its consciousness. He stood to leave, moving with the careful precision of someone conserving limited strength. "I have perhaps 1 or 2 days before it completes its study of our temple's spiritual practices. You may have slightly longer. There is much academic knowledge to absorb." "Wait," I called as he reached the door. "There has to be something we can do. Some way to fight back." Kandararu Mahesh paused, his hand on the doorknob. "There is one possibility. but it would require a sacrifice greater than the 49 who died in our binding ritual. What kind of sacrifice? The kind that destroys the teacher to prevent the student from learning. With those cryptic words, he was gone, leaving me alone with the growing certainty that my time was running out. That night, I made what I believed would be my final journal entry. The hunting pattern is now clear. The devouring wind systematically eliminates those who disturbed its prison, but not randomly. It chooses its victims based on the knowledge they possess, learning from each death and growing stronger. I am not a survivor. I am a resource being carefully managed until it can be fully exploited. When the entity has absorbed everything I know about archaeological techniques, historical analysis, and academic methodology, it will discard me as it has discarded the others. But knowledge is a double-edged sword. If the thing in the vault can learn from us, perhaps we can learn from it as well. Perhaps there is still time to find a way to turn our knowledge against our hunter. The mark on my forehead grows warmer each night. Soon, I think, the lessons will begin. The dream started on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Kandararu Mahesh's visit to my office. They weren't normal dreams. They felt more like forced downloads of information directly into my sleeping mind, as if something was using my unconscious state to install knowledge I had never learned. I dreamed of the original binding ritual in vivid, historically accurate detail. I saw the 49 medieval priests as they prepared for their sacrifice, watched them weave their life force into barriers that existed in dimensions beyond normal human perception. The process was far more complex than the surviving manuscripts had indicated. It required not just willing death, but a fundamental transformation of consciousness that allowed the priest to become part of the spiritual architecture of reality itself. But mixed with these ancient memories were newer visions, the devouring wind as it had been before its original binding, roaming across a world that looked almost like Earth, but wasn't quite right. The continents were in different positions, the stars followed unfamiliar patterns, and humanity was different, smaller, more primitive, but also more spiritually aware. The humans of that ancient time could see the entities that moved through the spaces between air molecules, could speak directly with forces that modern science didn't even acknowledge existed. The devouring wind had been just one of many such entities in that primordial world. They weren't evil in any way humans could understand. They were simply aspects of reality, operating according to their own nature. The wind consumed life force the same way fire consumed oxygen, not out of malice, but because that was its function in the cosmic order. But something had gone wrong. The balance between the entities and early humanity had been disrupted, and the creatures of air and void had begun feeding too aggressively. One by one they had been bound by priest kings who understood the deeper structures of existence. The devouring wind had been among the last to be contained, and its prison had been designed to last until the cosmic balance could be restored. That balance had never been restored. Instead, humanity had evolved away from spiritual awareness, developing technology and rational thought at the expense of their ability to perceive the hidden layers of reality. Modern humans couldn't even see the entities that surrounded them, let alone bind or control them. I woke from these dreams with knowledge I had never learned. Complex formulas for calculating spiritual energy, detailed instructions for manipulating consciousness itself, theoretical frameworks that bridged the gap between ancient mysticism and quantum physics. The information felt foreign in my mind, like files downloaded into a computer that wasn't designed to process them. The serpent mark on my forehead had begun to pulse with its own rhythm, synchronized with my heartbeat, but slightly out of phase. When I looked in the mirror, I could see thin lines of silver light beneath the skin, spreading outward from the mark like the branches of a tree. The pattern was beautiful in a terrifying way, resembling both neural networks and ritual diagrams from ancient texts. More disturbing was the way my perception was changing. I could see things that weren't quite there, shadows that moved independently of their sources, ripples in the air that suggested invisible presences, patterns of light and darkness that seemed to carry meaning like a form of visual language. and I could hear the devouring wind more clearly now. Its voice came not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness, bypassing normal sensory channels entirely. "The teacher awakens to the lesson," it whispered during my waking hours. "Soon the knowledge will be complete, and the gift can be fully given." Gift. It considered the stolen knowledge a gift, as if it was doing me a favour by downloading alien information into my human mind. I tried to fight back by documenting everything, writing detailed accounts of each dream and vision, in hopes that someone else might find a way to use the information constructively. But as I wrote, I realised that my handwriting was changing. The letters were becoming more angular, more precise, and occasionally I would find myself unconsciously writing in scripts I had never learned, Sanskrit variations and symbolic systems that shouldn't have existed. The entity was changing me from the inside out, replacing my natural thoughts and memories with its own alien knowledge. On the seventh night of dreams, I finally understood what Kandararu Mahesh had meant about destroying the teacher, to prevent the student from learning. The old priest had found a way to corrupt the knowledge transfer process, introducing errors and contradictions into the information being absorbed by the devouring wind. He had committed ritual suicide in the traditional manner, using meditation techniques to fragment his consciousness as death approached. Instead of dying cleanly and surrendering his knowledge intact, he had deliberately corrupted his own memories, filling them with false information and spiritual poison that would damage anything that tried to absorb them. The devouring wind had learned this too late, after it had already consumed the tainted knowledge. The entity was now struggling with contradictory information that was slowly eating away at its ability to maintain coherence. But I was running out of time to follow his example. Final journal entry found on desk 3 days later. "The house is breathing now. I can feel the walls expanding and contracting with each pulse of my heart, synchronized to the rhythm of the mark on my forehead. The devouring wind has found me at last, and it no longer bothers with subtlety. I understand everything now, the full scope of what we unleashed, what it plans, how it intends to use the knowledge it has stolen from us. The entity doesn't just want to feed on humanity, it wants to transform our entire world into something resembling that ancient realm, where it once roamed freely. The other bound entities sleeping in their prisons across the globe are beginning to stir. The devouring wind's escape has shown them that the old bindings can be broken. Soon, Tibet's mountain spirits will crack their stone seals. The Mesopotamian hunger gods will rise from their desert tombs. The Greek void walkers will emerge from their island caves. But I have learned something the entity doesn't expect me to know. The knowledge transfer works both ways. As it downloads alien information into my mind, I have been uploading human thoughts into its consciousness. Our emotions, our irrationality, our capacity for self-sacrifice. All of these things are foreign concepts to a creature of pure appetite. I have been teaching it to doubt itself. The silver lines under my skin are spreading faster now, reaching toward my heart. When they arrive, the transformation will be complete, and I will become another puppet in its growing army of the consumed. But I have prepared one final gift for my hunter. Every lie I can think of, every false memory, every fictional story, every impossible contradiction. I am filling my mind with deliberate chaos, poisoning the well of knowledge before it can be fully drained. The window is open, but no breeze enters. The air itself is holding its breath, waiting. I can smell rain and iron, though the sky is clear. The familiar touch caresses my face one last time. No longer cold, no longer patient, but desperate with hunger. The devouring wind whispers, "The breath is mine." But I whisper back, "The breath is poison." The silver lines reach my heart. The world explodes into note found attached to journal. Professor Malhotra's body was discovered by university security 3 days after his last contact with colleagues. Official cause of death: respiratory failure. The room showed signs of extreme temperature fluctuation, and several windows were found shattered from the inside despite no evidence of wind or weather damage. More disturbing were the writings found throughout the house. Thousands of pages covered in scripts from dozens of languages, including several that linguists have been unable to identify. The text appears to be either advanced theoretical physics or elaborate fiction. Experts cannot agree which. The investigation was closed after all electronic recording equipment in the vicinity began malfunctioning simultaneously. The house has been sealed pending further study. In Kerala, the Sri Padmanabha Swami temple remains closed to the public. Vault B has been filled with concrete and steel, though local residents report that the temperature around the site continues to fluctuate dramatically. No other incidents have been reported as yet.